There is nothing worse in this world than the feeling of regret. Is it delusional to continue, or is grief of our lost dreams worse? How often is it that we think about the environment in a similar stance? How often do you think of the environment and the surroundings in a similar manner? That's exactly what we'll be discovering today. Keep watching.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba-ba. It's a Tanzanian original.
So I have exciting news to share with you all, and you have to wait till the end of the episode. Welcome back to What in the World podcast. I'm your show host, Raisa Gangji, and in today's episode, we will be discussing the extent of the impact of international environmental conferences and frameworks dedicated to combating the effects of climate change. Will we regret the consistent failures of international environmental conferences, or will we take a stand? The clock is ticking. TikTok, like not the app because it's not sponsored. Out of all the countries in the world, third world countries, several Asian and African countries are mostly affected by the consequence of climate change. We see the recent change in weather patterns, especially if you're in Tanzania, you see the change of weather patterns and more severe rainfall. And our economies and our infrastructure is greatly impacted by the consequences of climate change. Despite the fact that third world countries did contribute the least to it. These international conferences recognize that fact. But empty promises take up in the form of hefty compensations, ironically much smaller than, actually less than half of what Qatar spent on the FIFA World Cup in 2022. And just a fraction of what the US spends on military. It makes us question, is climate change really a priority to our world leaders? Or does our life end when their term is over? The world is ours, but how much of that is true? The last 35 years have been a period of intense and continuous international negotiations in climate change, where anthropogenic activities has increased carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere and other greenhouse gases by twofold. Even though relatively there's been success in combating climate change and adopting strategies that combat the consequences of climate change. However, much is yet to be fulfilled and much is yet to be achieved. Currently, the goal is to prevent the global average temperature from exceeding a 2 degrees Celsius increase from the pre-industrial temperature. Now, to understand the premise of today's episode, we need to go back in time to the 1980s, where the threat of climate change was just recognized by political voices, such as Margaret Thatcher, the previous Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and George Bush, previous President of the United States of America. They recognize this due to record-breaking global temperature, which is now more or less a monthly trend in the 21st century. Every single month. It's a global trend now. TikTok should pick it up. Along with recognizing the increase of global temperature, the discovery of the ozone hole over Antarctica really pushed forward such political voices to raise their concerns regarding climate change. Their speeches echoed the urgency of averting the crisis by recognizing the crucial science behind climate change. Through the support of global leaders all over the world, the UN held the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, formerly called the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, the UNCED. Their aim was basically to help member states cooperate on sustainability and protecting the world's environment. The success of this conference led to the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development. By 1994, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, and currently has 198 countries who have ratified the convention. The main objective of the UNFCCC is to prevent dangerous human interference with the environment and the climate system. The Rio Declaration played an influential role in diffusing several key principles of environmental treaties. It was the largest gathering of such kind during that time. Fast forward to 1997, the first international treaty, the Kyoto Protocol. The Kyoto Protocol addressed rapid global warming by man-produced greenhouse gases and committed state parties to reduce these emissions. More specifically, that all developed nations would reduce their emissions by 5.2% relative to the 1990 levels by 2008 to 2012. However, it wasn't until 2005, after Russia ratified the treaty, that the Kyoto Protocol met the requirements that at least 55 countries, representing 55% of the greenhouse gas emissions, who are participating to make it more equitable to the countries with less of an outstanding history of greenhouse gas emissions. Treaties, protocols, frameworks, or accords, whichever one of these, they all provide countries with a framework. They all provide countries with a framework that our country has to use to reach certain sustainable development goals. I don't want to go so much so into detail with the drama that followed this treaty, which, not surprisingly so, involved the US doing sneaky and snarky stuff during the meetings and forming somewhat of an alliance that got countries to withdraw their promise to the Kyoto Protocol, and they signed the Copenhagen Accord, which the only thing it had vastly different from the Kyoto Protocol was countries' responsibility towards climate change and lack of thereof. Moving past all that, we get to 2015, where the Paris Agreement was formulated, and that was at COP21. The Paris Agreement can be considered to be one of the biggest successes of the COP meeting so far. It ensures that all the Kyoto Protocol mechanisms and rules would remain. Some of the breakthroughs made through the agreement was keeping temperature levels below 2-degree increase, limiting increase to at least 1.5 degrees compared to pre-industrial levels. The Paris Agreement also goes on to highlight the difference of a 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature increase and a 2-degree temperature increase, and how the environment and the climate would be vastly different due to this minimal temperature increase. The Paris Agreement also caused the establishment of the Green Climate Fund, setting $100 billion a year funding targets, along with the notion of voluntary emission pledges for all members and the launch of the global stocktake process to link nationally determined contributions to the overall aim of the Paris Agreement. The first global stocktake was launched in COP28. This was last year in late November, early December of 2023. And the global stocktake would be a major statement for countries on how far they have come in ratifying the Paris Agreement, reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, and overall all the activities they have done to combat the consequences of climate change and meet the sustainable objectives of the Paris Agreement. So in the global stocktake, collective progress is measured every 5 years. So starting from 2023, which was the launch year, the next global stocktake would be in 2028. Our country and several member state countries have agreed to commit to the objectives and the goals of the Paris Agreement. So all we have to do is now support our country and see where we go and see where the world goes. I also want to share that the Paris Agreement was such a huge success in COP21. Even the Vatican and Pope Francis published a letter, an encyclical to be exact. The letter was based on up-to-date scientific knowledge of climate change, and with the recognition of climate change with science, it also called for a unified global action towards combating climate change. Now let's get to COP28, which was just last year. So COP28 was held for about 3 weeks in December of 2023 in Dubai. The exhibitions done by Dubai in preparation for COP28 were spectacular, even if the conclusion of the conference was not far from unexciting. So this agreement was concluded to be the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel era, and this was said by the UN Climate Change Executive Secretary Simon Steele, with the ultimate goal of achieving net zero by 2050. The COP28 president, Dr. Sultan Al Jaber, also issued a statement saying that the agreement is an enhanced, balanced, but make no mistake, historic package to accelerate climate action. So I did say the conclusion of this conference was not far from unexciting. So let me get into that. So many activists came out to actually say that these climate conferences just delay the immediate action that is necessary for keeping the global temperature below a 2 degrees Celsius increase. And that is what is specified in the Paris Agreement. However, as global temperatures near the 1.5 degrees Celsius mark, we do not see many larger countries who are responsible for a great majority of greenhouse gas emissions take immediate action. I have discussed in the previous episodes that the number one contributor to greenhouse gases is fossil fuels, and activists call for a halt in its exploration, production, and infrastructure, a complete phase out of fossil fuels. For instance, Greenpeace was recently in the news for its protest in the middle of the ocean, stopping a company from exploring the ocean bed for minerals. And that's because exploring deep under ruins the environment and ruins the ecosystem of aquatic animals down below. All these negotiations and the adoption of frameworks come at a very crucial time for Tanzania. Not only Tanzania, but most developing countries who are just beginning to implement strategic projects involving fossil fuels and in their objective to stretch out the power grid. Do watch our previous episode. It'll be linked up here where we talk about the Tanzanian President Samia Suluhu's mission into extending the power grid. So, retrospective of the result of the COP meeting so far, many experts say that while the COP meetings are meant to be a vehicle for solutions, all it does is recognize a problem that the rest of the world seems to have already identified a long time ago. Experts even went further to say that the agreement has so many loopholes that it risks rendering it meaningless, especially when it comes to our efforts to combat climate change in keeping global temperatures below 2-degree increase. So going back to the existential questions I asked in the beginning, with developing countries becoming more goal-oriented towards sustainability, especially when it comes to development, how are national funds and budgets allotted to climate-friendly practices and projects? Tune into our next episode where we talk about climate financing and green businesses as we go international. Yes, you heard me right. What in the World podcast is making its international debut. Now, I don't mean that we haven't already gone international. We got many watchers, okay? But what I mean by when I say we're going international, we're going to another country. So I have exciting news to share with you all. I was doing a course facilitated by UNITAR and funded by the people in the government of Japan. I was one of the 24 to 25 participants from 3 African countries who were selected to be flown all the way to Japan to finish the remainder of the course. Since I'm flying to Japan, of course I'm going to take you with me. So you're coming with me. So pack your bags as I pack my bags. So tune into the next episode where we explore Japan and carbon financing as I complete my course with you. Alright, that's all. Thank you so much for watching What in the World podcast. I'm your show host Raisa Gangji and I will see you in the next episode. If you would like to support our channel in the form of a sponsorship, my PayPal is raisaganji@gmail.com. If you want to collaborate with our channel or join the team as a volunteer, do contact us at whatintheworldpodcast.tz@gmail.com to get in touch with us. And finally, stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, stay happy.